Welcome back to Master Your Marriage. If you're new here, I just wanted to let you know that we do release a new episode every week. So be sure to hit that subscribe button before we go any further, just so that you don't miss what we have coming up next. And if you've been with us for a while, I just want to say thank you. We really do appreciate you. And the single best way that you can support the show is to leave a 5-star review and a short comment. It genuinely helps us to be able to reach more couples who do need this work and who do need this information. So today I am running solo again. It is Robert's birthday. So usually we give up about one night a week to record the podcast. And tonight I thought rather than doing that, I would take him out for his birthday to his favorite steakhouse. So today you get just me. But, we've spent the last 2 episodes looking really closely at contempt, how contempt shows up, what it does to a marriage, why it is so corrosive, and why it's the #1 predictor of divorce, actually. One of the clearest takeaways that I get from this work personally and from this conversation is that empathy and contempt cannot live in the same room. I want to say that again. Empathy and contempt cannot live in the same room. When contempt is operating, what we do is we elevate ourselves. We see ourselves as better than, as smarter than, more mature than, more justified than the other person. And often that elevation is not because we truly believe that we're superior. Sometimes we do, but sometimes it's just a defense against feeling less than or feeling ashamed. But either way, the result is the same. Disgust and superiority crowd out the capacity to be able to stay present with another human being. And when we can no longer stay present with the person that we claim to love the most, we start hurting them. We start wounding each other without really fully seeing it. So today I want to talk about the skill that stands opposite to contempt, the skill that can interrupt this downward spiral. And that skill is empathy. And this is not a, I know empathy is important type of a conversation. It's actually quite serious. And even if you think you're not very good at it, it is a muscle that we can all deliberately build or rebuild. So today we're going to slow it down and do a thorough job discussing empathy. I'm going to pull the clearest teachings from Nonviolent Communication, and I'm going to connect that directly to the contempt conversation that we just finished. And then we will end with a practical exercise that you guys can take away and utilize this week. Okay, sound good? So let's start with a clean definition. What is empathy? Empathy is giving someone our full presence and sensing what is alive in them at any given moment. Okay, but Sharla, that sounds really weird. What do you mean, what's alive in someone? What I'm talking about is the feelings and the needs that are alive in the other person. That's it. That's what empathy is. It's full presence and using your empathy muscles to sense what is alive in the other person, their feelings, their needs. It isn't about generating the same emotion inside of ourselves. So if they're feeling sad, we need to generate sadness inside of us. That's not it. It's not about agreeing with them either. It's also not about fixing them. It's about being present with them, sensing their feelings, sensing their needs without any agenda whatsoever. So why does this matter so much after talking about contempt for the last 2 weeks? Because when we slip into contempt or that one-up position, that superiority position, there's 2 things that happen almost immediately. First, we lose our ability to see the other person as an equal. And when that happens, their experience starts to feel less relevant, less valid, even sometimes beneath us. We may have even a sense of disgust toward the other person. The second thing that happens is we stop being curious because we think we already, quote, know why they are the way that they are. And when curiosity dies, the willingness to sense what is actually alive in them right now goes with it. So empathy requires the opposite posture. It requires us to come down from that superior position and stay present with another human being who has feelings and needs that matter as much as our own feelings and needs matter. And that is why empathy and contempt cannot coexist. One is rooted in elevation and distance, and the other is rooted in presence and in connection. And if you have noticed that you can sometimes feel empathy for other people, for almost everyone else except for your spouse, this is usually what's happening. Somewhere along the line, grandiosity crept in, contempt crept in, and that has made it hard to stay present with the person closest to you. You might also notice that you struggle to feel empathy for most people, for people in general, and that could also be a clear indicator that you have made contempt a regular habit of mind. And I would suggest, if that's the case, going back and re-listening to the last 2 episodes on contempt. But the really good news that I have to share with you today is that empathy, i.e., giving someone our full presence, is a skill. And it's a skill that can be learned, it can be practiced, and it can be strengthened regardless of where you're starting from today. But before we go further into how to do it specifically, we need to clear away some of the common confusions. A lot of people think they are offering empathy when in fact they're actually doing something else. So let's talk about what empathy is not. Empathy is not sympathy. And here's why. Sympathy turns the focus back into our own feelings. For example, if I say to you, "Oh, I'm so sad that you're going through this." Well, I think sometimes we often just say that because we don't really know what else to say. It may come across, and usually is, well intentioned, but the problem is that it pulls the attention away from what's alive in the other person, and it points it back to our reaction, our sadness. Whereas empathy keeps the focus on the other person, not on us. So what else is empathy not? Empathy is not giving advice. And this is another thing, we just do it reflexively, especially when we get uncomfortable with other people's feelings, which we often do. But the truth is, most of the time when someone is sharing something hard with you, they don't need a solution, at least not yet. What they need is to be accompanied. They need someone who just cares, whose world stops for just a moment in time because they're hurting or they have pain. And jumping straight into advice can feel dismissive. Even when the advice is good, even when it's well intentioned, it can be dismissive. If they want advice, usually they're going to ask for it. And honestly, I kind of find this to be comforting because that takes the pressure off of you from having to feel like you need to come up with a solution to everyone's problems. Usually you don't. So what else is empathy not? Empathy is not saying, "I understand." "Oh, I understand exactly what you're going through." Again, I think this is just something that we're conditioned to say without really thinking about how it lands for the other person. We never really do fully understand what another person's exact experience is, do we? I mean, we can try, but the idea that we can truly walk in another man's shoes is impossible. So that's why these words often shut down a conversation rather than keep us connected, because the person feels possibly dismissed, or maybe they feel like, "Oh, well, maybe you really do understand. Maybe you already get it. There's no reason for me to continue talking." So a more connecting response would be something like, "Well, what was that really like for you?" Rather than, "Oh, I understand what you're going through." So empathy, what else is it not? It's not correcting. So when your partner, let's say they come to you and they're upset with you and they have a grievance that they want to share with you, and perhaps their version of events feels completely unfair or inaccurate, there's this urge to try to correct the record. It's a very strong urge, but the order of operations here matters. I love this reminder. I can't remember who said it. I think it might have been the Gottmans, to connect before you correct. Connect before you correct. There's a time and a place for further discussion, for you to share your perspective, but maybe that time is tomorrow. Right now, here and now, when your partner is hurting, this is the time for you to stop, for your world to stop. When people trust that their inner experience will be valued first, they become far more capable of hearing a different perspective. later. So if you want to have influence later, if you want to be able to have them listen to your perspective, it's probably best for you to be present with them right now in this moment. And what's really interesting about that is that often the correction is no longer even needed once the connection is actually made. So what else? Empathy is also not agreeing. It doesn't mean there needs to be agreement with the other person. And this is really important because if you remember back, one of the biggest losing strategies in relationships is needing to be right. Needing to be right will pull you right out of presence and right out of empathy. And honestly, who's right, who's wrong? The answer to that is who cares? And it especially doesn't matter right here in this moment. You don't have to believe that the other person is right to give them empathy. You only have to believe that their experience is their experience and it's real to them. And you just need to be willing to sense it from the inside. So, given all of that, what empathy is not, we've kind of covered some of these misconceptions. How do we actually do empathy? Well, there's three things, very important things that make empathy possible. And the first one I'm going to share with you is actually probably the hardest. So the first thing that makes empathy possible is being present. Being present. Martin Buber, the philosopher and psychotherapist, said that presence is the most powerful gift one person can give to another. He also said that the reason it's so difficult is because it requires bringing nothing from the past into the present. And that is the hard part, isn't it? Because our minds are constantly wandering and our mind pulls in old stories, old hurts, old conclusions that we've made in the past about who this person is. The brain remembers the past while it's also thinking, oh, I need to be thinking about what I should say next. But the moment we start analyzing or defending or preparing our response is the moment we lose presence. And that's why it's so hard to do. But it's also why it's the most powerful gift that you can give someone, because presence means we stop. We put the phone down, we turn towards them, we let our attention rest completely on them without an agenda and without a distraction. And the truth is that most of empathy that you actually do is nonverbal. You can do empathy literally without words at all, because literally it's presence. It is your attention. So the quality of our attention and our presence is what matters far more than the elegance of our words. Okay, the second thing that we need to have that makes empathy possible is being able to focus on the now. Okay, empathy happens now in the present moment. And sometimes people are telling you stories about something that happened long ago in the past, and it becomes very difficult to stay present with what's alive in them right now in the present moment as they tell that story. So they may be talking about something that happened last year, but the feelings and the needs that are active right now in this moment are what we want to try to attune to put our attention on. And this can be challenging when we're trying to give that person empathy. So one thing you can do if you're having a hard time staying present with them and as they're talking about the past, is to maybe say something to them like, wow, when that happened, you felt so alone. Are you still carrying some of that anger or sadness or whatever the emotion is that they just shared with you? Are you still carrying some of that emotion right now? And what that does is that keeps both of you in the present where the connection is actually possible, because presence and connection happen in the now. Okay, the third aspect, or the third thing that is required to give empathy is, again, like I said earlier, connecting to what's alive in them, which means sensing their feelings and their needs. And this is really the heart of empathy. Behind every story, behind every pain that someone shares with you, there are feelings, real feelings and real needs, likely unmet needs. So behind that criticism, behind that complaint, even behind that harsh word, which is not okay, but what you'll begin to realize is that even behind that harsh word is a tragic unmet need and a strong feeling. And empathy is the willingness to sense those things in that person rather than getting defensive or reacting to the surface words that they're saying. So when we hear a judgment from another human being, we really do have a choice. We can get defensive. That's not true. What are you talking about? What about you? You do those things too. How are you doing that to me? Or we can look for the feeling and the need that is underneath the word. You can ask questions like, help me understand. Are you feeling hurt because you're needing to feel like you matter here? So imagine just for a moment, your spouse, you take them to them a grievance and they respond to you without defensiveness, but instead they say, are you feeling hurt right now because you're needing to feel like you matter? Imagine your spouse saying that to you. How would that change your stance in that moment? Would it soften you? That kind of empathy creates a shift. It creates a shift in both people, a shift that has the potential to turn what will be a conflict, and perhaps a conflict that could go on for days, into something profound, a deeper connection between two people. So what were those three things that I just said were possible for empathy to exist? One, giving your full presence. Two, focusing on the now, what's alive in them now, and then attuning to their feelings and their needs. Now, is this always going to be easy? Absolutely not, especially if your muscle is weak. You might find it maybe easy with some people, but not with your spouse. You might find it easy to give empathy to a friend or a stranger at the grocery store. But in higher stakes situations with the people who trigger you the most, it is especially not easy. And it requires a lot of practice to be able to build this muscle. Now, there's three situations, and I just want to call these out because there's three situations in which empathy is especially hard to give. And I want to acknowledge these so that you can better plan and prepare for them. So the first one that makes empathy really challenging is hearing harsh words and criticism. When you hear harsh words and criticism from another person, it can be especially difficult to offer empathy. Of course, it's better to have not use those harsh words and criticisms in the first place. I'm not condoning those behaviors, but we also don't need to take them personally either. If we're practicing empathy, it can make it a lot easier not to take those words personally and still stay in connection. So hearing harshness is one of the most difficult places to be able to stay present with another person. When someone says something to you like, you're so selfish, you never think about anyone but yourself, what happens is our nervous system immediately starts to sense danger, wants to push us into fight, flight, or fix. And likely we will come back to defend our character or maybe do a counterattack. So I want to share with you a story of what is possible instead. So Marshall Rosenberg, the creator of Nonviolent Communication, he told a story about walking through a refugee camp. This was decades ago, but it was shortly after there had been a riot. And he was introduced to the refugees as an American. Okay. And that was not a great thing. And this man in the crowds, after he was introduced, suddenly screamed at him, calling him a murderer, you murderer. And instead of defending himself, which you could argue would be a very reasonable thing to do, seeing as he was not a murderer, Rosenberg sensed what might be alive in that man. And he said something like, so are you feeling furious right now because your need for safety is not being met? And that small moment of just trying to sense what was alive in that man opened a door. It didn't immediately change the man's stance. He was still pretty hardened, but it opened a dialogue where they were able to continue the conversation, where Rosenberg was able to continue to sense and offer empathy. And by the end of that conversation, the man ended up inviting Marshall Rosenberg to come to his home and to have dinner with his family. That was a crossroads moment. You know, I think we have crossroad moments all the time. In that moment, he could have responded with, I am not a murderer. Can't you see? I'm actually here to help you. And honestly, that would have probably seemed like a really appropriate response for most people. But from there, what might have happened? It could have taken those two men into a much more combative, intensified situation. But that's not what happened. He chose the other path at that crossroads. He chose not to be offended. He chose to instead sense that this is a man who is living in a dangerous situation, whose basic safety is compromised, and he is acting out from those feelings and those needs. And so he took a guess, took a flyer, are you feeling furious because your need for safety isn't being met? And in that moment, the energy shifted, right? It started to shift because that man felt seen. And if we're guessing what someone else, as we're sensing and we're trying to guess what they're feeling and needing, are we always going to guess right? No, of course not. But that's not the point. The point is that we are willing to look past the harsh words to the human being and the unmet needs that is driving that person's behavior. So in marriage research, you've heard us talk about this many times. We know that harsh startups almost always end up escalating. It's like 95% of the time, a conversation that starts harsh always just escalates and never gets turned around. But not always. About 5% of the time, it actually doesn't escalate. And empathy is one of the few things that can interrupt that escalation, de-escalate, and create a pathway for a really quick repair before that escalation even starts. So the first of the three situations that can make empathy challenging, as I just said, are harsh or critical words. But there's two others. Okay. The second situation is when the other person isn't very vulnerable or open or emotional, quote unquote, right? Some people do not easily name their feelings and needs. Some people really struggle to even be in touch with their own feelings and needs themselves. And in those cases, sensing can be a little bit more challenging, and we may have to work a little harder at it, and we may have to check our assumptions out loud with them. So if you're trying to do empathy with someone like that, just ask them if what you're sensing is correct. So let's say they're sharing a story with you. Try guessing the feeling and the need that you think that might be there. For example, you might say, "Hey, I'm guessing you might be feeling discouraged because you're needing some appreciation." Is that close? And it's okay if we're wrong. Sometimes we will be wrong. A lot of times we will be wrong. But what's amazing is that the person feels seen, that you cared, that you had enough compassion to try to figure out what it is that they're feeling and needing. The third thing, there's one more thing that makes empathy really hard. And that is when the other person says no. When you hear no from someone, it is really hard to stay in empathy. No, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to go out to that movie. No, I don't want to go to dinner with you. No, I don't want to have sex with you right now. No, I'm not available for that. And when that happens, our ego often hears rejection, right? And it wants to get defensive because it's feeling rejected. But with empathy, we can start to hear the feelings and the needs that are behind the no. Because usually when someone is saying no right now in this moment, it's because they have a need that they need to honor in this moment. So empathy allows us to keep the focus on them, not reacting to our ego. So maybe that person is saying no because they have a need for rest right now, but tomorrow they're open for it. Maybe they have a need for their own autonomy because they're feeling dominated. Maybe they have a need for peace because there's been a lot of chaos. So when we can stay curious about the human being and the needs behind the no, we stay in relationship with them instead of sliding into resentment or contempt or scorekeeping. Now, if you're new to giving empathy, naturally you will wonder if you're doing it right. So how do you even know? Am I doing empathy? This feels weird. I don't know if anything is actually happening right now. How do you know? Well, I'm going to tell you another quick story. I was doing an empathy exercise with a couple. This was probably like a month or two ago. And the husband was worried that he would sense and guess it wrong and that would end up upsetting his wife. And I said, let's just go with it. Try not to worry too much about doing it perfectly. Just try to sense, and we'll debrief afterwards and see how you do. So afterwards, we did this debrief, and I asked her first how she felt to receive his empathy. And even though there were times that he didn't guess right. And she said, you know what? It actually really didn't matter that much if he named my exact feelings and needs. What really just was amazing was how good it felt to receive his presence. And then I asked him, so how was it to get it wrong occasionally? How did it feel just to give empathy, even if you couldn't name the exact need that was behind her story? And he said, you know what? It really ended up not being relevant or mattering at all. It was just the act of staying present with her and sensing what was alive in her. That felt really good. And so how do you know when you're doing empathy? Honestly, it just feels good. That's how you know. And it feels good for both people. It usually feels different in your body and in their body. And you'll notice defenses lower, judgments tend to soften. There's a sense of connection rather than analysis or debate. The person on the giving end of empathy obviously softens because they feel more compassion, but the person on the receiving end also usually softens, even if they came in harshly. And that mutual sense of being with each other is one of the most intimate experiences that two people can share. Talk about a way to bring more intimacy into your relationship. Okay, so we've done a lot of talking about empathy today, and no, talking about empathy is obviously not enough. This is a muscle that we have to build, and it's a muscle we have to strengthen. We have to practice it, especially in places where it has atrophied the most. And one of the tools that I want to give to you today is a tool that I use with clients often, and it's called the emotion shifting exercise. And it's designed specifically for those moments when you're feeling negative emotions, when you're feeling like you're moving towards judgment, contempt, superiority, or reactivity, and you want to better understand your own feelings and needs, as well as the person who is triggering you, what their feelings and needs might be. So here's how it works. I want you to grab a piece of paper, and I want you to put a big lowercase t in the middle of the paper. So you're essentially making two columns and two rows. And I want you to think of a recent statement someone said to you that was triggering, a recent situation that was triggering for you, something someone did or said that was upsetting. And I want you to write that statement down at the top of the page. Write down what they said. Okay. And then in those columns, on the left column, above the left column, I want you to write me, M-E. And then on the right, above the right column, I want you to write the other person's name. So first column, back to the first column, under me, in the first row, I want you to list all the feelings that arose in you as a result of their comment. Anger, frustration, contempt, annoyance. What were the feelings that arose in you? And then the second row, I want you to list the needs of yours that were unmet in that moment. Respect, care, compassion. What were your unmet needs in that moment when you heard those harsh words? And be as honest and specific as you can be. If you struggle with feelings and needs, you can also Google that online and probably find a kind of a universal human needs list or a list of negative emotions. Okay. Now in the right column, on the right side, where you've put the other person's name, I want you to start working that empathy muscle right now. And I want you to try to sense or guess with curiosity, not with certainty, because you're probably not going to know for certain, but just guess what they might have been feeling when they said those harsh words. Were they feeling frustration? Were they feeling sadness? Were they feeling unseen, unheard, unloved? What were their feelings? And then what needs of theirs might not have been met that led them to say what they said, and put that in the second row. Now look at both sides and sit with both sides of this chart. What your feelings and needs were, what their feelings and needs were, and notice whether anything shifts inside of you. Even a teeny, teeny, tiny little shift that moves you towards greater understanding or towards a softening is a sign that you have an empathy muscle, and it's a sign that it's working and that you can continue to strengthen it. So this exercise, what it does is it trains the exact skill we need when contempt or judgment starts to rise in ourselves or when we start to feel it from others. It forces us to locate our own experience first so that we're not projecting, and then turn toward the other person's possible experience and try to better understand them. And over time, of course, this becomes easier. It becomes easier to do it in real time without having to take a week break to, kind of contemplate it. You're able to do it more in real time and see that behind everyone's comment is a feeling and usually a tragic unmet need, which allows us to seek for understanding and some sort of resolution. So I'm going to put a printable version of this worksheet in the show notes. So if you'd like to access it, I'm going to make it available for a short time for free. If you would like help in doing this in person, live, with or without your partner, feel free to reach out to me for coaching through our website. So here's the deal. As I begin to wrap this up, empathy will not fix everything in a relationship, but without it, almost nothing else we try is going to last. So think of empathy almost like soil. If you're going to plant good things in your soil and you want them to grow, you need to prepare and have good soil. And empathy becomes that soil in which other things we can learn to do can get better communication, better repair, better intimacy, and eventually more lasting closeness. Those things will grow in that soil. So here's my challenge for you this week. Pick one recent moment where you felt judgment, where you felt superiority, where you felt grandiosity, where you felt contempt, and do the emotion shifting exercise with it. Notice what happens in your body and in your perspective. And if it feels right, feel free to share one small piece of what you discovered, either with your spouse or with me. So remember, be kind to each other this week. Notice what's alive in the people you love. And when the urge to elevate yourself rises, remember that you have a choice. You can stay above them or you can come down alongside them and be with them. One of those paths leads us back to connection and one does not. So if this episode you found useful, would you consider leaving us a 5-star review and tell me one thing that landed for you in this episode? And if someone in your life also needs this conversation, please share it with them. Be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. It's the small things done often that create the biggest impact. Until next time.